Hello everyone and welcome back to another Planet Zoo 2 video where today we're going to be discussing 30 of the community requested species that are currently on the meta wish list that I think would make perfect additions into Planet Zoo 2's base game. Now these are my picks out of the list. One of your favourites that you haven't seen added to the game yet might not be in here, so I apologise in advance. But these are of course just animals that I think would make good additions, would flesh out areas of our zoos that are currently lacking, flesh out niches that aren't being filled right now, and overall just improve certain regions that are lacking in particular animals. So without further ado, let's get into it. The short-beaked echidna is our first consideration. Much like the in-game platypus, it is a monotreme, so a mammal that lays eggs. It would fill a niche in the Australian roster that isn't being filled, and that's a terrestrial monotreme, but also an animal that can just go well with so many of our ground-dwelling marsupials. So I've seen them housed with quokkas, koalas, wombats, wallabies, all those different animals. Echidnas can be housed with them. They're also an insectivore, which you don't actually have amongst our Australian roster right now, and so would be quite a unique pick. And just a few of the quirks that they have, when they, when they eat, they blow snot bubbles, which is one of the cutest things that you can see. In a group, they'll also walk in a conga line, so mum will be in front and the puggles would be following behind. And even just in the breeding season, you'll see multiple echidnas following one another in an echidna caravan. And yeah, that's just a few of the cool things that I think would make the echidna a fine pick for the base game, as well as also just being one of the best known Australian animals. Going from Australia to New Guinea, we have the Goodfellows tree kangaroo, possibly the most prevalent of all the tree kangaroo species in captivity, and certainly my favourite. So these guys live in the mountains of Papua New Guinea and use their long tails for balance, and when they hop along, they'll actually swing that tail to different sides of the branch depending on the side they're facing, and that just gives them perfect balance. In contrast to their terrestrial cousins, the kangaroos and wallabies, their hind feet are quite reduced and are perfect for hopping along branches without them being too long that they lose their balance, and can actually rocket up a tree quite quickly and even hop along the ground. They're very cool. I've met a couple of tree kangaroo species in my time, and they're all just fantastically charismatic creatures and would make fantastic additions. As well as also being an endangered species, they are one of the very few animals that we can get for Papua New Guinea outside of birds. So I think it would be really good to diversify that particular island, as it is one of the largest islands on Earth with a great roster of tropical wildlife, and the Goodfellows tree kangaroo is probably one of the best known to the zoo community. Our next consideration is the ever popular Patagonian mara or Patagonian cavy. So these are found on the Patagonian steppe in South America and are one of the largest rodents on Earth, I think coming in 4th, I want to say. But they're also quite fast, being able to rocket across the land, almost like a pronghorn antelope, just much smaller, and of course rodents, but they are often confused for deer just because of how they stand, how they run, and all sorts of other aspects that are just not that rodent-like. They even sit on their bums like a dog does. But they're really cool. They go well together with a whole range of different animals, so I've seen them housed with rheas and guanacos, and tapirs too. And they can even go well with their ever-friendly cousin, the capybara, and are really just a good species for filling in a South American exhibit because they are just able to go with so many different species. So you'd probably even just be able to put them with the monkeys as well, the giant anteater. I don't know about the maned wolf, but at a stretch you probably could. Now there are a few antelope in this video, the first of which being the 4th largest in the world, the greater kudu. So this is one of the larger antelopes that you'll find in the African bush, with males sporting massive spiraling horns and a pretty prominent mane coming down the neck. They're quite magnificent, males towering above females with some really cool markings around the face, and they're pretty well suited to living amongst other animals. So I've seen examples of them being housed with giraffes, zebras. They're basically a general African antelope, but are much taller than most of the ones that we currently have in the game. There is another antelope coming up later that is much larger in terms of weight, but yeah, I think you might be able to guess what that is. But the greater kudu would just be a really cool animal, as it has such a distinct silhouette and is a very iconic antelope from the African savanna. Next is the ever popular South American coati. Much like the Patagonian mara, this is one of the more popular South American species that the community has been pining for. Related to raccoons, they do have a few similarities, such as the ringed tail, the markings around the face that almost make them look like little bandits. But a few differences include the very flexible nose that they use to pick up scents throughout the forest, and large groups form of just females and their young, with males having been previously confused as a separate species named Coata mundis. But the males are just quite aggressive in a group, and so not really recommended to house them in large groups. So yeah, they're a very interesting bunch. They also hold their tails up much like the ring-tailed lemur to signal where their fellows are in the bush. But they're really cool, quite charismatic, arboreal as well, so they can spend a lot of time up in the trees. And arboreal animals tend to be quite fun in the game when building habitats for. And especially if we were to get a revised climbing system, it would be really good to get the coati in. But overall, they're just really cool animals, quite widespread throughout South America, can go well with a whole range of species like the ones I mentioned before with the mara. But even a unique one that I've seen is coatis and spectacled bears being housed together. So that would be a really cool little habitat to make, just having the spectacled bears and then a few climbing structures for the coatis to escape their much larger roommates. Then we have the quite distinct golden lion tamarin. Now personally, this isn't my first tamarin pick, but I feel like if we were to get one, it would be this one, as it is a conservation success story with so few in the wild at one point that many were brought into captivity and have been successfully bred, and so have been reintroduced into the wild of the Atlantic forest in Brazil and are now making quite a comeback. And yeah, they're quite popular in zoos. I've never seen one, but I have been to zoos that have them. But they are a really cool little monkey, and yeah, extending the primate roster to the marmosets and tamarins would be a really good step in the right direction for diversifying the primate roster, because tamarins in general look very different from one another depending on the species. So for me personally, I probably would have picked the cotton top tamarin, just because I like the contrasting colours, of which the golden lion tamarin doesn't really have, where it's largely golden and orange. But then you get golden lion tamarins, which have white and brown and grey skin, and then emperor tamarins with a brown and orange coat, a bit of a yellower end to the tail, and a big white mustache. Tamarins in general, I think, would just be really great for the base game. And these guys can be housed with all sorts of other animals too. The secretary bird needs no introduction. It is a magnificent bird of prey from the savannas of sub-Saharan Africa, very well known for their prowling behaviour, stalking through tall grass to look for snakes, which are one of their specialities, as the secretary bird has evolved these long stilt-like legs that you can't really see in the image here, but they do have them, that are covered in hard scales to stomp snakes to death, basically. So they'll actually focus with that back talon that birds of prey have, and that would be more of a stabbing kick more than just a stomp. But they're very cool, quite charismatic, with those long feathers on the head, which resemble a secretary from the old days, which is how the bird got its name. But they're really cool and have quite a distinct silhouette, and though they're not as common in zoos as most of the animals on this list, they're still really cool and quite popularly requested. Then for a large monkey from South America, the black and gold howler monkey of the Pantanal. So they are near threatened, but have quite distinct sexual dimorphism, with the males having much thicker fur, a more prominent chin, I would say, and the females being quite a nice golden colour. But they're known as the loudest primates on Earth, and probably one of the loudest animals on land, with their calls being able to be heard over several kilometers. And yeah, they're just a really cool monkey. They would also be one of the few animals in the game that utilize a prehensile tail, as we really don't have a lot in the game. I think the binturong is the only animal that we have that has a prehensile tail, though I think the Saki and Capuchin monkey have prehensile tails, they just don't use them. But the black and gold howler definitely does, as they hang from it to feed on leaves. But they're really cool monkeys, and would certainly be a nice dawn chorus in any South American section. A fairly rare animal in zoos, but a very iconic animal of the Arctic Circle, the walrus, is one of the largest pinnipeds on Earth, with its distinct tusks and array of vibrissae whiskers for sensing through the mud of the Arctic Ocean floor for clams. But they're really big, so they're much bigger than the grey seal and California sea lion that we currently have, but are quite rare in zoos, and despite that, they are ever popular, as they would make a perfect addition to any Arctic section, as they are really just that iconic because of those magnificent tusks. But they are really cool. I've seen some displays, not in person, but at places like Paradise in Belgium, where they have underwater viewing of the walruses. And yeah, they're quite charismatic, so they certainly make a good addition to the game just for their charisma alone. But yeah, I know so many people want the walrus, and I'd be lying if I didn't agree. The next animal on our list is the Nile crocodile. So we don't actually have a lot of crocodiles in the game. We have crocodilians, but the saltwater crocodile is our only true crocodile. And Africa has multiple species of crocodile, and yet none of them are represented. So I'd say including the largest of them all would be a good step. And the Nile crocodile is probably the most common crocodilian kept in captivity. So they're found in crocodile farms and crocodile parks across the world, and breed quite well, so they're probably a useful animal for any franchise players. But also really impressive, with males being one of the largest animals on Earth, and also one of the longest lived of all the crocodilians, with one individual, Henry, that was caught in 1903 as a full-grown adult, being now over 120 years old. So they would certainly be a long-standing resident of your zoos, but also quite iconic, going well to mirror habitats that are housing hippos as the two most iconic riverine animals of Africa. Much alike the walrus, the muskox is not exactly a common sight in zoos, but is nonetheless one of the most iconic animals of the Arctic Circle, being the heaviest land animal up there, and also one of the most impressive with those mighty horns and a big shaggy coat. The musk oxen is perfectly adapted for battering rivals and also surviving the cold. Now, they're fairly difficult to house in captivity, so it would be a good challenge for players, but otherwise, if you're in a cold biome, housing them wouldn't be that difficult. But they are really cool animals, one of my favourite animals of the Northern Hemisphere, and definitely an animal that I want to see housed alongside my reindeer, dull sheep, and even as possibly a backdrop to an Arctic fox habitat. The grey-crowned crane is one of the most recognisable birds from Africa, with its distinct head feathers and grey coloration, as well as its red wattle. It's certainly a distinct animal, and one of two crowned cranes found in Africa, but this one is by far the most widespread in captivity, and would certainly make a great addition to the game just to diversify our cranes, as we have a red-crowned crane, which is one of the most iconic, especially from Japanese mythology. But if we were to get another crane, it would be the grey-crowned. And not to mention, they go well with a whole range of savanna species, much like a lot of the African animals in the game, but would certainly be a striking sight to see strutting across the savanna. Geoffroys, or black-handed spider monkeys, are by far the most common spider monkey species in captivity, found in zoos from Australia to Asia, Europe, and the Americas, and even Africa, I think. But they're really cool, so I've seen these guys many times, and they never disappoint with their charisma. And honestly, would be a great way to expand the brachiation mechanic, as spider monkeys don't just use their arms and legs, but also their long prehensile tails, which acts as a fifth limb, and they can suspend their entire body from this tail and also use it just while they're going along a branch. And so that would be a really good way to change the brachiation dynamic from just the overhanded behaviors of gibbons and orangutans to also using other aspects of the other characteristics of the primate body that help them move through the trees. And certainly would be great to have some spider monkey islands in my zoos in Planet Zoo 2. The serval is another iconic predator from Africa, one of the smaller cats, but nonetheless is a deadly predator, one of two cat species, the other being the current caracal, to catch birds mid-air, and also have quite a striking coloration with a mix of spots and stripes, and also a relatively small head compared to its body size, with large ears for detecting prey. They're quite common in captivity. I've seen these guys quite a few times, but they never disappoint as they are just a regal looking animal and would certainly be a great addition to any African section. Our next species is the mantled geriza, a species of monkey with a fairly distinct look from the eastern forests of Africa. So they're very cool, they're quite common in captivity, and are housed not often with too many other species except for at least one other monkey, but also can be housed with gorillas too. So that other monkey we'll talk about a little bit later, but these guys, I've actually never seen one, even though they are housed here in Australia, but they're very cool with that distinct long hair that runs from their back and onto their tail. They have quite a unique look compared to other monkeys in the game and would certainly be a great addition. They're also a decent size, so would certainly diversify the monkey size range. But Africa doesn't currently have too many monkeys in the game. We only have the mandrill and the hamadryas baboon, so it'd be good to get some more proper tree-dwelling monkeys other than the sort of baboon type sort of monkeys. But mantled geriza would certainly be at the top of my list in that regard. A species from a similar part of Africa to the mantled geriza is the iconic shoebill, one of the tallest birds that's able to fly in Africa, and honestly one of the most intimidating too, well known for its intimidating stare that it gives towards people that are able to see it. But they're very cool birds, not too common, and you have to go to very particular places to actually see them, but they're really cool. So they're quite tall, they're carnivorous, and are fairly rare in zoos, so you have to actually go to very specific institutions to actually stand a chance of seeing one. But otherwise, they're certainly a bird that would diversify the African wetlands, as we really don't have too many animals from there. The only ones I can think of being the lechwe, the hippos, and I'm trying to think of others. Nile monitor is another, and not too many others. Greater flamingo as well, but yeah, diversifying the African wetlands is certainly something that a lot of the animals here could potentially do. The American black bear is the last bear species that could be added to the game, as we have all the others, but they're quite common in captivity and are also fairly widespread, being found in a range of different biomes that most of the other bears can't tolerate. So they can be found in taiga biomes, tundra, temperate, grassland, tropical, especially in the evergreen forests of British Columbia, but also deserts too, so they can pretty much be housed in almost any biome that you build for them. So they're quite adaptable and certainly would be an easy animal to look after. They're also quite iconic, so the American black bear is just one of those animals that you know, and so would certainly make sense to include in the game just because of its iconic nature. The helmeted guinea fowl is a species that I've seen displayed with African species ever since I first went to a zoo. Like they are very well they do very well at being housed with other species. So I've particularly seen flocks of them housed with rhinos, giraffes, zebras, basically all the African herbivores that you can think of, but also a free roaming animal in zoos too, much like a peafowl is. So you can just see a flock of guinea fowl roaming around a zoo depending on the one that you go to, because helmeted guinea fowl in particular have been domesticated, so are certainly an animal that can be considered there, but one of the main reasons I want them in the game is just because of that striking coloration. Those beautiful feathers would certainly be eye-catching in the zoos. And not to mention, domestic guinea fowl in particular come in a variety of colour morphs. But yeah, are a very distinct type of bird from Africa and would be great to see. Another icon of North America is the elk. Well known for its bugle-like call, it's a magnificent deer species, and given how well Frontier has modelled many of the deer in the game, I know they would knock this one out of the park. It is just one of those animals that, like the black bear, you just know. Although you probably know it more for its call than how it actually looks, as in Europe, moose are often called elk as well. But the wapiti is probably the term that you'd use to differentiate it completely from the moose. But they're a very cool deer species, one of the largest in North America, just behind the moose. And that bugle-like call that the males make would certainly be a great ambience in your North American parks. The last marine species on this list is the sea otter. So these are an endangered but also fully marine otter. So they are the largest of the mustelids, being much heavier than even the giant otter from South America, and are really cool and quite iconic as well, and are also found in quite a range of institutions as well, largely as rescues, so I don't know how many have been successfully bred, though I believe there's at least one example that I've heard of. But they're really cool animals, quite iconic, and otherwise I think it's just that they're cute. But also they would diversify the Pacific coast of North America more than anything else. So we have Cali sea lions, and a range of animals that can also be found on the Pacific coast, but sea otters are just one of those animals that you think of when you think of like the Pacific coast of California or just of North America in general, and so it would make a lot of sense. But like the walrus, I feel like it could have been an aquarium list rather than a habitat animal list, but here they are anyway. But I think they would just be one of the perfect animals to just house in a variety of different coastal themed exhibits. One of the biggest missed opportunities from the Asia Animal Pack, Planet Zoo's last DLC, both literally and figuratively, is the gaur, the largest bovid in the world. So these guys stand much taller than both bison species and are easily one of the most intimidating of all wild cattle varieties. And yeah, they're very cool, housed with a whole range of different herbivores in captivity, and in general just are really cool to look at. Yeah, there's not too much else to say on the gaur other than that they're really cool. But they're found all across India and other parts of Southern Asia, and so could go well in a variety of different sections, being housed with a whole range of different animals like Indian rhinos, blackbuck, nilgai, all sorts of stuff. Now, I know a lot of people want the common or Guianan squirrel monkey, but personally I think the black-capped, or in Australia we have specifically the Bolivian squirrel monkey, is much better of a choice, just because it is much more colourful. Has a great deal of contrast with the black cap on the head, but also some nice golden olive green colours that they have across their fur, and in general are just, I think, much cuter in my personal opinion, as I have been quite close to some of these guys. And squirrel monkeys are much smaller than you'd probably think, so they're really cool. I've seen they're quite widespread in captivity as well, even next to the Guianan squirrel monkey, but in general I just think they're a much more colourful species to include, as the Guianan, though it is still colourful, is not quite as colourful and striking as this one. But even despite it not being the Guianan squirrel monkey, you'd still be able to use it for the exact same purpose. Our old world monkey that is housed with the mantle geriza is the de Brazza's monkey. So colobus monkeys and guenons are two of the more widespread and diverse monkey groups in Africa, and alongside the current African primates that we have would certainly add to the diversity. as guenons in particular, like the de Brazza's monkey, are possibly the most diverse, with a whole range of species across the Congo Basin and other parts of Western Africa. And the de Brazza's monkey is quite a picky animal in terms of who its housemates will be, as it does have a particular diet and can be quite aggressive to others. But the mantle geriza eats different stuff. It eats leaves, whereas the de Brazza's monkey prefers fruits and a particular kind of leaf compared to the colobus. And so you could create a really nice dynamic habitat with these guys. Have the colobus and the de Brazza's monkeys in the trees, gorillas on the lower branches and on the ground with some red river hogs. Sounds like a pretty good habitat to me. And of course you could change out the gorillas for something like okapis, mandrills, bongos, all sorts of stuff. But de Brazza's monkeys are just one of the cooler looking of the guenons, I'd say, and are also quite widespread in captivity as well. One type of bird in particular that many people have been pining for, myself included, is a pelican. Now for me personally, I'd go for the Australian pelican just because I think it's a little bit more striking. But the great white pelican, looking at it, I can see why it is popular. Not just because it was in Jumanji, but also its distinct blue, yellow and pink face. It's very distinct in its coloration and certainly would make a great addition to many European and African exhibits. And in general, great white pelicans are housed probably more prominently than any other pelican species. Being more of an ambient species than anything else, not really necessarily having dedicated exhibits. As I've seen them in exhibits with African penguins, they've also just been in ponds to liven up the area, alongside primate islands, main savannas, all that sort of stuff. So they're a really useful animal in terms of just being a gap filler. And also pelicans in general are just one of the cooler waterfowl varieties. Another really cool bird that I'd say would make a perfect addition, not just because hornbills are my favourite group of birds, is the southern ground hornbill. So this is the largest of all the hornbill species and is endangered in some parts of its range, but is known for one thing and one thing only, and that it has a knack for hunting snakes. So these guys are actually pretty fondly looked upon in some parts of Africa, because snakes are one of the more feared animals in those respective regions, and so with hornbills around, they're quite well respected because of that. Using that long, sharp bill to precisely take out the snake's head, but they're also known to parade the snake around to show, I got my kill, I've got a snake, and just wander around holding the lifeless body of a snake up in the air. They're really cool birds, quite charismatic, quite curious as well, being able to discern several different situations with curiosity more than fight or flight. As I think there was a clip from the show Deadly 60 where instead of going after the rubber snake, it went after like the boom mic, as well as Steve Backshall's shoe. And I've seen a channel called Wildlife with Cookie. If you haven't seen it, definitely go check it out. It's a really great channel. And he was driving around South Africa and they were pecking the car. So they're certainly a curious animal, and I think would be a real great species just to have in the game because of that charisma, and also that they don't really look like any other bird that we currently have in the game. So yeah, they'd be fantastic to see. Rock hyraxes are another African species. Now I know Africa is already bloated in the game, but Africa just has great species. Rock hyrax being one of those, being quite a small mammal, but also related to aardvarks and elephants. Being an Afrotherian, I think is that no, Afrotherian I think is just elephants, but either way, they are related to elephants as well as aardvarks, sirenians, elephant shrews, but are known for their rubbery soles that they actually sweat to create suction so that they have better grip on rocks and trees. They also have quite an interesting range of vocalizations that they make in captivity, and so you have rock hyraxes in your zoo, they would certainly be a noisy lot. But they're really cool animals, can be housed with a whole range of species like meerkats, clip springers, and all sorts of other species. You could even have them just on a cliffside overlooking a savanna exhibit potentially. That's just an idea I've had, and if we were to get rock hyraxes, it's probably something I'd try out. But they're really cool little animals and would certainly fill a niche in the African roster of quite a lack of small mammals. The Reeves muntjac is a fairly famous deer species from Asia, but is probably better known for being introduced to the UK, where there are quite a lot of them. But this species is generally quite placid and docile, known for their tusks that the males sport to battle one another during the breeding season, fend off predators, and even eat a small mammal occasionally. But they're pretty nice little deer, and we don't really have a small deer species in the game. We have plenty of antelope, but no actual difference necessarily in terms of the size of the deer, as pretty much all the deer we have in the game are quite decent size. But Reeves muntjac could be housed with a whole range of different animals. You could have them as a forest floor companion to the red panda. You could have them just in the habitat with giant pandas potentially, Pierre David's deer, Przewalski's horses, markhor, just a whole range of Asian species. The muntjac could go well with any of them. Probably one of our, I think, yeah, it is our last South American species, the southern tamandua. So this is an animal that, of course, is an anteater, but is also arboreal with a prehensile tail to grip onto trees and be able to hang its entire body from just that tail. So they spend a lot more time in the trees than their cousin, the giant anteater, and would be a really nice addition just to flesh out the nocturnal roster, but also just the insectivore roster, as insectivores generally have a much more unique appearance compared to most other animals. And in general, I think tamanduas are just fantastic animals, as like I've stated, for many of the animals here, they are quite charismatic when you give them the chance. Our last two animals are both antelope, and both of which I think have something special to offer. The first being the gerenuk. So this is also nicknamed the giraffe gazelle because of their long neck and also tendency for browsing. So this species will stand on their hind legs, hold their forelegs up, almost like they're trying to tiptoe around like a house or something, and then put them up on the branches and be able to feed on the leaves from the acacia branches. Their small head also ensures that they're not just barging through a lot of the branches, getting caught on the thorns, so it's perfect adaptations. They also have a long tongue that they use to wrap around the branches to strip off the small leaves that are in amongst the spines. They're really cool antelope. Like, they're not massive, but are really unique in terms of their appearance. And our last antelope is one of my favorites, the common eland, which is the second largest antelope on the planet, just behind their cousin, the giant eland, which is only a little bit bigger. But these guys are quite common in zoos, housed with a whole range of different animals, and I think they're probably well known for that video that came out like recently where a bull eland, much like the one you see on the right there, sparred up to two white rhinos and was put in his place, to say the least. But they're really cool. Like, they're huge for one, so they're much bigger than any other antelope we'd have in the game, being much stockier and a little bit taller than the nilgai, I'd say, and generally just a heavily built antelope that we just don't see in the game currently. I would have picked the giant eland if not for one factor, and that's prevalence in zoos. So common elands are much more you're more likely to come across a common eland than the giant eland in a zoo, just because they're easier to acquire, but also do better with a whole range of animals than the giant eland does, which prefers to generally be kept on its own. But yeah, they're really cool animals. Would certainly love to see Frontier bring this one to life, especially given their pretty good work on the nilgai. Now, I feel many of these animals would be easier to implement than others, with existing rigs that can be recycled for several of these species. But this list, I think, is solid. Like, I can't imagine that all 30 that I have here would make it into the game, but I would love it if a majority of them did. Now, the walrus and sea otter, as I stated earlier, would fit better on an aquarium list, but here they are. But the aquarium list is going to have a similar number of animals, 30 different species, as, like, I think really just it's best to limit the number of animals that you want. And I think out of this roster of new species, I'm going to create a bingo card for when Planet Zoo 2 starts rolling ahead, and yeah, just see how many of these animals get in over others. And who knows, we could get some new species surprises. But how many new habitat animals do you think we'll get in Planet Zoo 2 alongside the aviary, exhibit and aquarium species? Let me know down in the comments. Put your list of 30 habitat animals that you want to see in Planet Zoo 2 in the comments down below, and I'll see you all in the next one.